G'day, welcome to Trev White Sailing. So I'm here in Port Vila. I'm almost ready to leave Port Vila for New Caledonia and Noumea. The lovely Fiona is not far from joining me and hopefully bringing some spare engine parts. And that's the topic of tonight's discussion. So in the background you're hearing the generator. It's been a bit overcast, so I need to charge up some batteries. But I thought I'd talk about engines. If you've looked at any of my videos, you've seen I've been working a lot on engines, so I thought I'd talk about what sailors should think about with engines. So if you're thinking about going sailing, you would be wise to learn about engines, and it doesn't matter whether it's mechanical or electrical. You need to learn something about it. If you don't, you need to have deep pockets and good resources, because shit breaks down. Let me tell you a story. When I first bought this boat, I was sailing from Perth in Western Australia to the Whitsundays in Queensland, around the bottom of Australia through the Southern Ocean, the Great Australian Bight, and I'd spent 6 months, revamping this boat, and the only thing I hadn't done was I hadn't pumped out the tanks, the fuel tanks. I'd done the water tanks, but I hadn't done the fuel tanks, and to my detriment, I neglected to do that. Even to cycle them and to put some bilge buster in there, I didn't do it. So halfway across the Great Australian Bight, I got bilge bacteria had developed in my tank. Sorry, bilge, diesel bug, and it clogged my diesel engine, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't get it fixed. I tried everything from pulling out the injectors to bleeding the whole system, trying to bleed the injector pump, and tried bleed the injector pump in like 6 to 7 metre seas, rolling seas, 40, 50 knot winds. It's fucking challenging, and I ended up losing one tiny little screw out of the injector pump, bleed screw, into the bilge. Then I had to go hunting in the bottom of the bilge for that tiny little injector pump screw, which was it was interesting, and it had me pretty green around the collars for a little while, but no, couldn't fix it, couldn't get it running, and I ended up sailing the next 500 kilometres, 250 miles into Kangaroo Island without an engine. And it's a sailboat, that's what they're designed to do, is sail. But I couldn't charge batteries, I couldn't, I ended up having to turn off the instruments, I was barely running lights. It makes things a little more difficult. Years ago, they didn't have electrical systems. They didn't worry about radios and lights. So these days we try to. But it took a lot to get that engine running, and but I did get it running with the help of a mechanic in Kangaroo Island. And in the end, I ended up using flush the whole system using outboard motor cleaner, toxic as fuck, and I used olive oil spray sprayed into the intake of the engine to fire the engine, and fire it enough that it would eventually pull fuel through and get the engine running. And it ran for like 2 days before it clogged up again. So I still had the engine bug, even though I tried to dose it with and when I got to Portland, I ended up pulling the whole engine fuel system apart, ripping out the tanks, pumping all the shit, and I pulled like several kilos of black sludge out of the bottom of the tank, and it was one of the most toxic, horrible jobs I've ever done. I don't recommend it. So preparation is something you should do. But back to engines. I think if you're going to go sailing and you know nothing about engines, you should go and do a diesel small engine course, or a diesel mechanic course. Maybe not a mechanic course, but diesel maintenance course. If you're going to buy a boat and it's got a shitty engine, well, rip it out and pull it down. Learn about it. There is no better way to become an expert on your engine than pulling it out and pulling it down and rebuilding it. If you get someone else to rebuild it, helping will give you invaluable insights. You get to see all the parts that are being replaced, the parts that are essential, the parts that wear. And on my engine, it's a 50-year-old Leyland BMC diesel engine. Love it. It's a wonderful old engine. It's like a Massey Ferguson tractor, incredibly simple, but at the moment it is busting my balls, and I'm having nothing but problems. And I did a major service only 6 months ago, and it's still busting my balls. It's probably on its last legs, truth be known, and You know, at Christmas I had to repair the manifold or the heat exchanger because it got a hole in it, you know, just wear and tear. And I welded it up. I couldn't buy a new one. I couldn't source one anywhere in the world. So I had to improvise and have it modified and repaired. And it's as good as new. Well, almost new. But, you know, mechanics said at that time, you know, you need to start considering thinking about getting a new engine, Trev, because this thing is getting hard for parts. Now, I can pull it down and have it repaired. I can still get parts, but, you know, can I get parts in places like Vanuatu? No, I fucking can't. Noumea, maybe not. We've had riots in Noumea, and they've burnt half the factories and shops down. Smart people have left. You know, am I going to be able to find a good mechanic? Possibly not. So I am my own mechanic. I'm a bit of a bodgy mechanic, but I can keep things running most of the time. But at the moment, it is really challenging me. So I would say, if you're going sailing, you know, learn how to maintain your engine. You know, don't be afraid of pulling shit apart. Like, you know, I once pulled my injector pump apart because they were going to charge me $2,500 to do an injector pump rebuild. Well, I thought, fuck that. I went and found an injector pump kit. I went and watched a video on Bundy Bear Shed, a bush mechanic up in North Queensland, and it was like a 2-hour video, but in 2 hours I knew how to service that injector pump. So I pulled it out, and half a bottle of whiskey later, I'd finished fixing that injector pump. I had it back in the engine the next day, and I had it running. Now, is it as good as a qualified mechanic? Possibly not, but it's been running for a couple of years, and all it cost me was $250 and half a bottle of whiskey, and, you know, several hours of my time. But it saved me $2.5 grand, and I learned a lot about the injector pump. An injector pump on my engine are really simple, and the fact that they charge $2,500 to put a kit through it is fucking highway robbery. I was disgusted after I'd done it. So yeah, you know, if it seems like something you could do, or it seems unreasonable, or in my case, I figure if I'm going to spend $2.5 grand, I might as well just go out and buy another one. You know, so I did the kit. I learned a lot about it, and that's sort of been my approach. Is if it's going to be expensive, I'm going to have a crack at it first, and or unless it's something I can't do, like rebuild the engine. And I could still rebuild the engine if I was back home on the farm. Brother's a bit of a bush mechanic. You know, played around with go-karts and motorbikes when I was a kid. I'd have a good crack at doing this engine properly. But I'm not back on the farm, and I'm in Vanuatu, and I don't have a workshop, and I can't get spare parts. So it's not the ideal place to be ripping down an engine, and I'm probably going to end up back in New Zealand and potentially rebuild this engine back in New Zealand if I can get the parts to do it. So, you know, that's weighing on me a little bit at the moment. But yeah, back to you. You know, an aspiring sailor or a new sailor or someone who wants to go offshore sailing. Like, it's easy when you're at home. You know, you can always find a mechanic to come down the boat. Yeah, they charge like wounded bulls. They're going to rip you off, they always do, unless you've got a mate. And if you've got a mate, you know, that's a favour, probably a carton of beer. But, you know, they're not always available, and so you've got to learn to do these things yourself. You know, changing impellers, piece of piss. You know, you should be able to do it because often they fail when you're out at the sea. First time I learned to do an impeller was I was sailing. I was anchored on a reef off the coast of Perth, started the engine, and then it stopped. And it stopped whilst I was trying to get the anchor up. So we worked out it was the impeller, and that's when I learned how to change the impeller. I hadn't done one prior to that. I was pretty new at boating at that stage. But I just sailed the yacht from the Whitsundays around the bottom of the Southern Ocean, back to Perth, and hadn't changed an impeller. You know, I guess I learnt that day. But yeah, one of the guys on board was a mechanic, and yeah, we just nutted it out and we did it. And after that, I knew how to change an impeller, and every 12 months I changed my impellers. Do I think it needs to be done every 12 months? No, I think these days I try and stick with the like 1,000 hours. So for me, that's about, you know, 3 or 4 oil change, well, probably 4 oil changes, and then I do the impellers. But if it looks like it's a bit dodgy, I'll pull it out and inspect it, and if it's looking good, I'll put it back in. If it's not, I will change it, and I carry 2 spares, and I keep the old one that I pulled out in a sealed bag in the bilge as a spare of a spare. That's how I think, and I carry a lot of spares. And if you're going to go offshore sailing, you're going to need to learn about spares. So someone like Nigel Calder, who was here, he has a very good mechanical electrical Bible. Strongly recommend getting that book. It's fucking awesome, and he has websites, and you'll learn a lot from that guy. His book is invaluable. I keep a hard copy, and I keep a electronic copy of updated version. Can't go wrong with that book. You'll learn a great deal about all parts of your boat. So yes, go and buy that book. But nothing beats actually doing this stuff and doing it while you're in port before you actually leave on a big voyage. So learn to do it. Same with outboard motors. If you're going to have an outboard, which most of us do, and I'm still a big fan of combustion engine outboards, your dinghy is your runaround. These electric outboards are fantastic if you're just going for a short distance. But if you're trying to go a couple of k's and do some diving or snorkeling, or you need to run off to the shops at the other end of the harbour, electric outboards suck. So I have a tiny little Mercury 2.5, which I can pick up one hand, no problems. And then I've got a 10 horsepower Mariner, which gets my boat up onto a plane, and I can do probably almost 20 knots. And I'm still a big fan of that two-stroke Mariner. It works really well. Goes for a few plugs, but it's a two-stroke. And you'll find when you get in the islands, two-strokes are everywhere. In Western worlds, they're trying to phase them out, and all this green woke shit. We're all going to four-strokes. Yes, four-strokes are far more efficient, but they also are far more complex, and they have more problems. Two-strokes are almost indestructible if you keep them clean, and you've got a good oil fuel mix, and you run them at the right ratios. They're pretty easy to keep running. And again, if you don't know how to service it, learn how to change the impeller, learn how to change the plugs, have a spare set of plugs, have spare impellers. If you're going up rivers and they're silty and sandy, and you're going in mud and you're sucking that shit up through the impeller, you're going to chew out your impellers. So learn how to change those things. Maybe put an oil filter, sorry, not an oil filter, a sediment filter on your fuel line on your outboard, because the fuel we get in the islands is garbage. There's lots and lots of crap in it. So just something to consider. But yeah, there we go. Another point on fuel. Fuel is garbage in the islands. A lot of it has got a lot of shit in it. It's got water, it's got sediment, it's got all sorts of things in there. So, I would say you need to change your primary water separation filter or filters every 12 months. Your secondary filter on the engine, I would change it every 12 months anyway. But, you can have a look at it and see what it's like, maybe every 2 years, because the primary should be taking out most of the stuff. And, filters aren't cheap, but, they are your insurance in your boat. And the other thing I do is I actually pump out the bottom 20 litres of my tank, which is typically water and crap and shit like that. The fuel sits on top of water, fuel floats. So I pump out the bottom part of the tank when the tank's been sitting still for a while. I pump it out, put it in a jerry can, dispose of it, at the oil waste facility at most marinas. That way, with condensation and other water in the fuel, anything that's settled on the bottom of my tank, I'm getting rid of. The other thing I did when I revamped my tank was I brought the intake of my tank up a little bit higher. So the bottom 30 litres of my tank, I'm not sucking up. I can always access it with a hose if I need to, if I get desperate. But I'm not sucking that fuel from right on the bottom of the tank. That's my waste. That's the potentially water and other crud. So again, something to consider. And most tanks are designed that way, but some aren't. Some are just they put the intake way too low, and if you get moisture, it can be problematic. Run out of rum, so I'm on the beers. What else have we got? With diesels, it's fuel, air, compression. They're pretty bloody simple beasts. But the other thing you've got is new diesel engines becoming a lot more complex. They're becoming a little bit like new diesel cars. We've got a lot more electronics on board, computers, things like that. Computers and electronics do not like salt water. It wasn't that long ago a guy come in a motor cat. He parked next to me in the marina. He'd limped into the marina with one engine, and they were 6-cylinder BMW engines, marinised, for boats, and they're fucking complex, and you can't work on those engines at all without a computer, and without a guy who knows how to run that computer. So we couldn't do shit. We couldn't get those things running. We couldn't, and they were simple. They just needed to be reset. There's a problem in there somewhere. And this guy was trying to get back to, I was in Harvey Bay, he's trying to get back to Brisbane. And I'm sort of going, mate, you can't leave with one engine. You had to go through a bar, which was a dangerous bar. You had wife and kids on board, and going, like, just suck it up, dude. Send them back on the bus or flight, and leave the boat here. And people get desperate, but if you can't fix your engines in the middle of nowhere, you're in a real pickle. I mean, I met a couple of people up in Fiji who had the same problems. They had quite advanced computer controlled engines, and they were flying mechanics into Fiji to fix their engines. Now that gets expensive really fast. You're paying a mechanic, I don't know, $1,000 a day at least. Another $1,000-1,500 for flights. Then you've got accommodation. You're not going to get out of that for less than about 3 or 4 days. That's if you can get it running. And then you've got spare parts if you need spare parts. I mean, God forbid you need a computer. I mean, there's going to be $2,000. Anybody who's got a car that's had a computer problem knows how hard they are to access, and if they're fried, how expensive they are to replace. So keeping your engine as simple as possible and the least amount of complexity will hold you in good stead. But you also need to keep a simple engine running well, and you need to maintain the parts. Little things like, exhaust elbows, they shit themselves all the time because you've got this horrible, corrosive, salty, hot, exhaust gas mixture hitting your exhaust elbow, and they always get chewed out. People are always blowing them out, and people don't carry spare exhaust elbows. I don't know why. I mean, they should, but they don't. And and I had one recently made. I was in the middle of the Whitsundays, and it punched a hole, and it started off a little bubble. I thought, what the fuck's that? And it was the salt was chewing through from the inside, and I ended up getting a Coke can and cutting that out and putting a patch over the elbow, and then I got some of that silicon tape, which is good to a 600 degrees. And then, I glued that aluminium on, and then I wrapped it in silicon tape, and I did a few layers, and that got me back to Civilization, where I then had to get that elbow off and get it made. Like, it only cost $300 to have made, so I had 2 made, and I put one in the bilge, forgot about it. So, but these things break, and you've got to be able to repair these things, and this is what the other thing is. People don't know how to improvise. Like, you've got to learn how to improvise, and that's where Nigel's book comes in handy, or where just having an inquisitive brain and a whole pile of lotions and potions, as I call them, silicon tape, Sikaflex type products, gasket goos, high temp gasket goos. Some of this stuff is good to 600 degrees. Some of it needs to be cold, but I have a range of these things. I have a range of glues, I have a range of spare parts on the boat, including things like, asbestos tape, so I can wrap, hot parts if I need to. You need to, start collecting all these things and having them in your boat. You can put them in a bag, stick them in the bilge, as long as it's dry, and forget about them until you need them. But, I find that I have them in a drawer because I'm accessing this shit all the time. I've got an older boat, but I can guarantee, new boat, old boat, you are going to be using this stuff. The people I meet on brand new luxury production boats are doing far more work on their boats and their engines than I am. And that's sad, they've just coughed up a couple of $1 million. They're got this beautiful boat, it's fucking gloriously, shiny, and they're just busting their ass trying to fix it. Like the first year, 18 months, 2 years, you'll be fixing your brand new boat, guaranteed. I've got an old boat, I accept that I'm going to fix it, and I know probably nearly every inch of this boat now, and I sort of know what's going to break. I know what I need to change out every 12 months, every service. Toilet pump's going to fuck up. The bilge pumps are going to clap out. Hose clamps corrode out. Hoses get worn. Obviously, impellers and fuel filters, things like that. But there's always hoses that you think are okay, and then they just fail in the middle of nowhere. Like I've had failing up here. Like I did a major service 6 months ago, and here I am in Vanuatu, and I've got hoses and rubber end caps failing that I only inspected 6 months ago, which looked perfect, and I wouldn't have expected that, but they are. So now I'm improvising and fixing and MacGyvering, and just so I can get back to the Western world, so I can repair these things. And when you're in the middle of nowhere, and Vanuatu is not the middle of nowhere. There is Port Vila is a fair sized city. There's a lot available, but trying to find things in these cities is incredibly time consuming. So if you've got the spare parts on board, you've got the gear to improvise, the gasket cements, the glues, the epoxies. It helps a lot. It helps an incredible amount. So start collecting that shit, and it doesn't last long. As soon as you crack one of those tubes, it's fucked in 4 weeks max. You got to throw it out. So every 6 months or 12 months, I'm replacing these products, and some of them are quite expensive, like the high temp sealers, gasket cements, the silicon type products. As soon as you crack those things, I give them like 2 weeks, and they're probably starting to go hard. But they are fantastic. Like you can put an exhaust elbow on. You can do exhaust manifolds. Heat exchangers. They're rated at 600 or 700 degrees. They can do cold temp as well, so they're quite versatile, and they're good products. But they're $40 a tube, so it's not cheap to be throwing that shit away once you crack it open. Same with super glue. I use super glue quite a lot, and as soon as you crack those open, in 2 or 3 days, they're gone. They're gone off, and they're useless. The other thing, you've got like impellers. Impellers need to be turned over. If you're carrying a pile of impellers in your boat, chances are they're already probably half fucked. So I try and carry 1 or 2, and an old one as a spare, and then every 12 months I replace 1 for 1, because I don't want to have a $100 impeller or a whole pile of them sitting there getting old and the rubber deteriorates. So you'll find that a good shop shouldn't have them anywhere where it's hot. They should be in a cool place, and they're turning over that stock regularly and keeping it fresh, and they're not on the shelf forever. And on impellers, like fuck, I bought 3 brand new impellers on eBay, and I got 3 shit dodgy Chinese rip-off impellers. I put one in, and it lasted 2 weeks before it spun off 2/3 of the fins. Luckily, I was somewhere safe when the engine stopped spitting water. I had to shut it down and went back through, and I found fins in my cooling system. And then I got the impeller out and looked at it, and it was missing 2/3 of its fins. And I thought, fuck, that is insane. Like, it's only 2 weeks old. And then I had a look, and I did a bit of research, and there was a whole pile of dodgy Chinese rip-off impellers. So now I don't buy impellers on eBay. I buy them from reputable shops where I know I'm getting a good product. So you've got to be careful of imitation products, because they're $100 each, these things. Well, for mine, they are anyway. A bigger yacht or a bigger motorboat, they could be several $100s, probably even $500 for the bigger ones. So it's still an investment, and you don't want to be making that several times if you've got shit impellers. So I encourage you to buy good quality parts. I'm not so worried about filters. I shop around a bit for filters. I still try to buy reputable brands. I'm very conscious of imitation parts. But back to the main topic, engines. Yes, you need to learn how to service your engine. Go get a copy of Nigel's book. It is a fucking godsend. I have used that book. I've got the original book. It's over 20 years old. It's like nearly 30 years old when I first bought it, when I first bought my yacht. And I was learning shit like it was going out of fashion. That book was always open. I was learning how to pull winches apart. I was learning how to fix windlasses, keep the engine running, heat exchangers. I don't know how much I learned from Nigel. I meet that guy, I'm going to buy him 100 beers. He's a fucking champion. So buy his book. If you see him, buy him a beer. He deserves it. And you know, and if your engine needs to be renovated before you go cruising, go and do it yourself. Learn how to do it. Like, you'll learn so much about what your engine needs. Or if it's going to be done in a shop, ask if you can hang around and watch them do it. They won't like it, but you know, you'll learn so much from the process. Or ask them the parts that need to be replaced regularly, and how to do it. You know, they might help you do that. You're probably going to be spending $5 or $6 grand anyway. But yeah, if you can do these things yourself, it's invaluable. Like, it's such a great skill to have. And on that point, like, tools. You need fucking tools. Like, the amount of times I loan out my socket set. Like, I don't have the most expensive tools. You know, I've got a Stanley socket set. It's good quality. It won't break, but it's not Sid Chrome. And you know, because I don't expect my tools to last forever. They're in a salty environment. They all get rusty. So I buy mid to medium range tools, and I oil them up. I spray them with oil, and I have a drawer full of big heavy shit, like, you know, Stilsons and big shifters and hammers and mallets, and you know, I have things like bronze. What do I call them? You know, they're what are they called? Persuaders. So, you know, I have a big hammer and a bronze persuader to help shit get off. Like, I give it a whack and I'm persuading it to come undone. The other thing that's really invaluable on a boat is a gas torch. So that means a heat torch that gets quite hot. You don't need an oxy, but you need to be able to, you know, not lubricate, but heat up seized bolts. So often bolts get seized, and I spray them with WD-40. I let it soak in for half an hour, then I come and I heat it up with a gas torch, and then I spray it with WD-40 again, or CRC, one of those products, even oil, and then I let that suck into the thing, and then I heat it up again, I spray it again, and I do this several times. I let it soak in, and then I come back, and generally I can crack those bolts far more easily, and that stops you from rounding bolts or nuts. And you know, so also you need good spanners, you know, a couple of multi-tools like shifters and big adjustable spanners, good set of screwdrivers of all sizes, really tiny screwdrivers as well, because you've got electronics on board, a magnifying glass so you can see this shit. Like, as you get older, you know, these things, yeah, they start to deteriorate. A magnifying glass helps, and there are quite a few of us older blokes out there sailing, and yep, we're all going blind. Come 45, 50, everybody's got glasses. Suck it up if you're young. A multimeter. The most fucking important thing you can have on boat is a multimeter. My God, don't go to sea without a multimeter. And if you don't know how to use it, learn how to use it. Get Nigel's book on electrical systems and learn how to use your multimeter. It will become your new best friend. On that, you need a whole bunch of wire, all the fuses that you could possibly use on your boat, and a few additional ones, spare globes, spare switches. I only replaced another switch on my water maker, so it just fused out. So that's the second one in 6 months. I'm obviously drawing too much current, and then also the bilge pump, you know, fucked out on me. So another switch burnt out, and they're supposed to be a few switches. So yeah, things fail all the time. Switches fail all the time, particularly if it's a moist environment. These things fail. Electricity and moisture does not like each other. It will cause corrosion. It will fail. So you need a good electrical box, and you'll start collecting this stuff. Have a look around your boat and get, you know, trying to get one or two of everything you think might need to be replaced. But, you know, good quality wire, several lengths of it, different gauges, you know, heavier gauges for your solar panels, lighter gauges for your instruments, you know, black wire, red wire, so you can, you know, put in, you know, positive and negatives. And if you've got other colours, you know, you might want to have a couple of rolls of smaller wire for instruments, because eventually everything is going to be fixed on your boat. And again, brand new expensive boat, brand new expensive problems. A couple of spare lights, because lights will clap out. These LEDs will fail. They'll get moisture in there and the electronics will fail. Even the seal ones. Oh, on that point, the other one that shits me to tears is navigation lights, bow lights. Like, my bow lights are up quite high, they're out of the water, but my bow is often underwater. If I'm plunging into a big sea, my bow lights are often underwater. So my bow lights, which are my navigation lights, port and starboard, are waterproof. How many of those do you think I have fucking replaced in the last few years? I must have replaced 6 waterproof navigation lights, and a stern light as well, actually, just recently. Those things always fail. I don't know what it is. I mean, the people who design them, I want to take a hammer to and give them a little reminder to improve their quality control. Maybe that's being a bit too aggressive. It's a passionate thing. I hate fixing navigation lights, and they always clap out when you're coming into harbour, when you really want them. But yes, navigation lights, have a spare set of those. Even spare cheap ones. You know, you can get a battery nav light where it's just got a port and starboard. You can stick it up on the bow, and that gives you nav light, so you know other boats can see you. Even Xylem sticks, which are chem lights, red and green. That'll give you port and starboard, and I carry those as well, just as a backup of a backup. But yeah, what can I say? You need to understand your engine. So back on topic again. Keep wandering around. You need to understand how to fix your engine, what parts you need for your engine. Have spares on board, you know, spare hoses, spare hose clamps, the tools to fix your engine. You know, it is endless battle. It's a grind. It is a fucking grind keeping this thing going. And as I keep saying, it doesn't matter whether it's a brand new boat with a brand new engine or an old clunker like mine, which is 50 years old with a 50-year-old engine. You're going to be in there fixing shit. I don't care whether you are, you know, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. If you're the only guy on board, you're going to be fixing that fucking boat, dude. You know, if you're some practical, you know, hands-on, earth-moving guy sailing a more modest boat, you know, fixing stuff is a bit more, you know, something you're used to doing. But it doesn't matter who you are. You know, if you're a female who hasn't done any mechanical work, you're still going to be fixing shit. So, and I find females actually dig in a lot more, and they want to learn how to fix things, because they, in many cases, they don't have that skill. They haven't been exposed to it unless they grew up on a farm, and you know, dad exposed them to fixing shit around the farm. But you know, if you grew up in the city, you don't always get the exposure. Like, I grew up on a farm type environment. My old man, I was the TA. You know, like from this big, I was his TA. You know, like, I learnt to weld when I was young. I learnt to fix cars when I was young. I didn't want to be doing this shit. I was just like, come here, you give me a hand, and so I learnt, and now, invaluable. I loved learning so much of this stuff when I was young. It's stayed with me. I mean, I haven't used things like welding skills and a lot of other skills a lot, but you know, working on engines and you know, fixing motorbikes and things like that as a kid has paid, you know, dividends for me as a sailor in remote places where I've got no one else to rely on. You know, if I can hire someone who's got more knowledge, I will hire them, but it's not always doable to get someone who can fix things, because often in the islands, a lot of the islanders, they don't have that knowledge. You know, they might be able to make something like an outboard work because they're used to working on outboards, but you know, working on your diesel engine, they may never have seen a diesel engine. They're practical people, but you know, they don't know what they don't know. And flying someone in, it might just be impossible to fly a guy in or a girl in to fix your boat. You know, if you're in the middle of the islands, there might not be any flights. There might not be an airport, and there might not be someone within, you know, 5, 10, you know, a month of where you are, and you've just got to work that shit out. So there's my digger tip for the day. Learn about your engine, have all the spare parts, have the tools, and invest some time in knowing how to do it. And lastly, but not least, buy Nigel's book. And if you see the guy, buy him a beer for me, because I'm giving you this tip to buy his book. And yeah, it's expensive, but by fuck, it will help you out and it will save your ass. All right, that's me done. Take care, and I will see you out there somewhere. Safe sailing.